Şimdi Bilgi Üniversitesi Hukuk Fakültesi Dekanı ve Avrupa Konseyi Yapay Zeka Komitesi Türkiye temsilcisi Profesör Doktor Sayın Leyla Keser'in video mesajını paylaşacağız.
Hello everyone, I am Leyla Keser. I'm an academic working on IT law related topics since 1998 at Istanbul Bilgi University. I'm from Gaziantep and you are in my hometown now. I would love to be physically with you, but I couldn't arrange my schedule and I deeply apologize for that inconvenience. It's a great pleasure being with you at that very timely and important international symposium on the impacts of the use of AI on the principle of non-discrimination. First of all, I would like to thank so much Hasan Kalyoncu University and the Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey for organizing that symposium and inviting me to share the work of the Council of Europe Ad Hoc Committee on AI, shortly we called KAHAI. The Council of Europe Ad Hoc Committee on AI, KAHAI, finalized its mission by the end of December 2021. KAHAI worked towards a possibly binding international legal instrument on AI based on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Drawing on my experience as a representative of Turkey, I would like to focus on the relationship between trustworthy AI and human rights and the democratic order. As noted by organizations such as OECD, as much as AI ethics guidelines converge on some principles, they contrast each other on what should be done in practice. Furthermore, as identified by the European Union's high-level expert group on AI, one of the three components of trustworthy AI is lawful AI, which necessitates regulation of AI by law. Similarly, the risks and deficiencies of mere self-regulation have been pointed out by the OECD as well. Accordingly, by putting human rights, democracy, and the rule of law at the center, the Council of Europe aims to resolve these issues. In relation to my first point, I would like to briefly outline the significance of this approach. One is the universality of these values, and particularly human rights. Generally, human rights are considered to be universal, and their scope have been delineated under human rights law. Furthermore, the abstract formulation of human rights also allows for their application in diverse social and cultural contexts. Second, human rights enable the horizontal application of rules, meaning that states are responsible for ensuring that individuals can enjoy these rights without any interference, including from private parties, which is of particular importance in the context of AI. Finally, human rights provide a methodology for resolving tensions between different interests and therefore enabling an objective assessment of trade-offs concerning AI governance. In relation to my second point, I would like to describe the benefits of governance based on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. It must be noted that reaching consensus on the fact that AI governance must be grounded in human rights is only the first step. Human rights law provides a blueprint, but not an actual AI governance framework, and the translation of human into practice is crucial. Nevertheless, principles underlying human rights and democracy provide guidance. The core value of human dignity may be considered constitutional in this regard. This value requires that all AI systems must be subject to minimum safeguards, irrespective of their level of risk. Again, human dignity necessitates the respect of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, even if the AI actor is private. Finally, and perhaps most notably, so-called red lines are an integral element of AI governance based on human rights, as certain AI systems dehumanize individuals and are therefore considered to be unacceptable in democratic societies. Another fundamental principle is legality, which is crucial for the realization of human rights and the rule of law. AI systems profoundly impact people's lives, and fundamental rights frequently operate in a vacuum and without legal basis. In the work of the KAHAI, the principle of legality is realized in two aspects. The document itself provides legality to AI governance as a legal instrument, while the principle of legality is also enshrined in the instrument. Pluralism, one of the hallmarks of democracy, is also critical to Kahai's efforts. The proposed instrument not only provides for the protection of minorities and vulnerable groups such as children, it also calls for the meaningful participation of different stakeholders in the governance of AI. Another noteworthy example is transparency, which is both a hallmark of democratic governance and the most frequently identified principle in AI ethics guidelines. However, in AI governance, it is not clear what transparency entails and how it should be realized. This principle has been translated into democratic AI governance by the Kahai through establishment of rights. Essentially, these are the right to be provided meaningful information on decisions made by AI systems, and it is corollary rights, such as right to object to such decision-making, access to effective remedies, and a mandatory right to human review of decisions. In this context, I would like to highlight the criticality of establishing concrete and positive rights of individuals, which has been incorporated into Kahai's work, but is missing in key AI regulation efforts, such as European Union's proposed AI Act. It must be noted that as much as Kahai is focused on human rights, it's also cognizant of the potential benefits of AI. Accordingly, the work of Kahai aims to strike a balance between the risk-based and the rights-based approach through the fundamental principles of proportionality. In order to operationalize human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in AI governance, the Kahai has adopted a unique form of impact assessment, the human rights, democracy, and the rule of law impact assessment. In other words, HUDERIA. It is not clear whether HUDERIA will be mandated by the binding instrument, but it is a concrete method that has great practical value. The policy development group of the Kahai has worked extensively on the details of HUDERIA, which will be made public, and we give particular importance to children and as a specific form of HUDERIA, we refer also child rights impact assessment, shortly CRIA. Finally, the Kahai has specific regard for public sector use of AI. As much as an human rights law creates obligations on both public and private entities, it is crucial to have a specific regard to certain public sector use of AI, such as law enforcement, the administration of justice, and public administration, which are of particular importance to fundamental rights and the democratic order. In the specific context of democracy, the Kahai also calls for the shaping of public opinion through AI, as well as its effect on the exercise, participatory rights, are also of utmost importance. At this stage, maybe we can ask a question to us, how we can ensure the fair participation of all stakeholders in the process of building the AI governance system. The Kahai itself can be considered to embody pluralism, as it enables extensive and meaningful participation of non-governmental stakeholders, as well as the participation of states that are not members of the Council of Europe. This is one of the perfect examples of multi-stakeholder working model, and this model is the key for enabling participation of all stakeholders into decision-making process in different levels. The different level means domestic, international, or intergovernmental. When we talk about stakeholders, it is important to shape a system which will take into consideration geographical diversity, gender diversity, vulnerable and marginalized people, children, private, public sector, NGOs, academia, and technical bodies. At the Kahai LFG, we have a specific we had a specific subgroup which we call SG7. This group worked on cooperation, compliance, and follow-up mechanisms. The cooperation is important in order to enable extensive and meaningful participation of stakeholders. To that extent, it is important for the states to work in cooperation with academia, civil society, research institutions, technical bodies, and other relevant public and as well as private actors take necessary measures to increase the public awareness and understanding of AI systems. Within that framework, independent national authority or authorities, which will be responsible for design, development, implementation, use and monitoring of governance mechanisms, will have important role in terms of enabling multi-stakeholder participation. So, well, let's look at key elements of the legally binding instrument of Council of Europe, TİHEK, on AI. This is the second deliverable of the TİHEK. The first one was TİHEK feasibility study, and the second deliverable is key elements of the legally binding instrument. So within that report, there's a restriction still on this document, therefore it is not public, but I would like to give a brief information about that. So within that document, we have elements relating to object, purpose, scope, and definitions, and we have also elements relating to fundamental principles of protection of human dignity and the respect of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The other elements relating to risk classification of artificial intelligence systems and prohibited applications of artificial intelligence. Then we have elements relating to development, design, and application of AI intelligence systems in general. We call that phases, the design, development, application phase of AI systems, we call that AI life cycle. And then we have elements related to development, design, and application of artificial intelligence systems in the public sector. And then we have some important elements related to democracy and democratic governance, and then elements on legal safeguards, and a few words on civil liability of AI systems. And then we have some elements related to supervisory authorities, compliance and cooperation mechanisms, and then possible additional legal instruments and surrounding possible elements. And then we have elements related to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law impact assessment. Then we have complementary elements relating to artificial intelligence in the public sector. And under that classification, I would like to refer the most important key elements of future legally binding instruments. So when we look at the elements related to object, purpose, scope, and definitions, the object and purpose of this legally binding instrument, the TİHEK recommends that it should in particular be stated that the aim of the instrument is to ensure full consistency with respect to human rights, the functioning of democracy, and the observance of rule of law in the developing, designing, and applying of AI systems, irrespective of whether these activities are undertaken by private or public actors. Regarding the scope, both public and private actors, that instrument cover that entities and put obligations or envisage obligations or roles and responsibilities for both public and private actors. And we have some definitions. We are reluctant to define what is AI, just because we think the technical bodies should have to define what is AI or AI systems. Accordingly, the OECD One AI put into practice a wonderful framework and classification scheme of AI systems. So the technical bodies or other intergovernmental institutions, they try to define what is AI systems, but as TİHEK, we are reluctant to define AI, what is AI, but instead of that, we define also artificial intelligence system, the life cycle of AI system, AI provider, AI user, AI subject, and unlawful harm. Relating to elements on fundamental principles of protection of human dignity and the respect of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. We highlighted the importance, the concept of human dignity, and then the Kahai noted that some of the provisions related to these particular elements may be formulated as positive direct rights of individuals or alternatively as obligations on parties to ensure the introduction in their domestic law and practice of measures aimed at protecting the rights of individuals in relation to AI systems. And the elements relating to risk classification of AI systems and prohibited AI applications of artificial intelligence, the Kahai recommended that a legally binding instrument should provide for the establishment of a methodology for risk classification of AI systems with an emphasis on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The criteria used for assessing the impact of application of AI systems in this regard should be concrete, clear, and with an objective basis, and the assessment itself done in a balanced manner, thus providing for both legal certainty and nuance. The Kahai considered that the risk classification should include a number of categories. Accordingly, we have 3 different risk categories: low risk, high risk, and unacceptable risk, based on a risk assessment in relation to the enjoyment of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And regarding prohibited applications of AI systems, so-called red lines or unacceptable risk, Kahai considered that a legally binding instrument should provide for the possibility of putting a full or partial moratorium or ban on the application of AI systems within accordance with risk classification are deemed to present an unacceptable risk of interfering with the enjoyment of human rights, functioning of democracy, and the observance of the rule of law. For example, the AI systems using biometrics to identify people, categorize or infer characteristics or emotions of individuals, in particular if they led to mass surveillance. And AI systems used for social scoring to determine access to essential services as applications that may require particular attention, taking into account possible legitimate exceptions. So regarding the development, design, and application of artificial intelligence systems, the Kahai requires the AI systems operators or the entities, public or private entities, they should have to put into practice the minimum safeguards. And the transparency of AI systems are also another important point. And we also highlighted the importance of AI is a technology, and the legal instrument, the future legal instrument, and or other legal frameworks, the laws and regulations, we have to create a balance between the technological development and the legal frameworks. So the Kahai recommends the inclusion of a provision encouraging parties to establish regulatory sandbox to stimulate responsible innovation of AI systems by allowing for the testing of AI systems under the supervision of the competent national regulator. To promote a multi-stakeholder approach and in order to raise awareness in society about the impact of the development, design, and application of AI systems, the Kahai considered it useful to include a provision calling for parties to promote evidence-based public deliberations on an inclusive engagement with this topic. And Kahai further proposes to include a provision on respect of equal treatment and non-discrimination of individuals in relation to the development, design, and application of AI systems to avoid unjustified bias being built into AI systems and the use of AI systems leading to discriminatory effects. For the same reasons, a legally binding transversal instrument should contain provisions on ensuring that gender equality and rights related to vulnerable groups and people in vulnerable situations, including children, are being upheld throughout the life cycle of artificial intelligence systems. So let's say a few words regarding democracy and democratic governance and the elements related to that two important topic. While recognizing that AI may play a positive role in the functioning of democracy and democratic governance to foster inclusive and participatory process, the KHI is also concerned about the potential use of AI to unlawfully or unduly interfere in democratic processes. The shaping of public opinion through AI, as well as potential chilling effects arising through the use of AI, should therefore be considered in the context of possibly legally binding instrument, whereas more specific issues regarding election manipulation, such as micro-targeting, profiling, and manipulation of content, so-called deepfakes, could be dealt with in more sectoral instruments. And the role of private entities, for instance, online platforms that help shape the public sphere should also be considered in this respect, insofar as the growing concentration of economic power and of data could undermine democratic process. And in this context, it is important to underline the need for respecting the right to freedom of expression, including the freedom to form and hold opinions and to receive and impart political information and ideas, and the right to freedom of assembly and association. So keeping that in mind, I would like to say my last words. So Council of Europe, KHI, finished its mission. But the Council of Europe established a new committee called Committee on AI, KHI shortly, for 2022 and 2024. And KHI has its first meeting in the first week of April. All right, I stop here and I try to share with you some important remarks and insights from the works of KHI. Look forward to explaining more on KHI's work in the near future. And thank you so much for listening me. And thanks much again to Hasan Kalyoncu University and the Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey for that amazing symposium and kind invitation. Thank you. Bye.